At this moment in time, Donald Trump was no longer just a businessman or a familiar name seen on television. He had become a figure who stood at the center of national attention, someone people talked about everywhere, in newsrooms, in coffee shops, in homes, and online. Some admired him, some criticized him, and many simply watched, curious about what would happen next. His journey had been long and complicated, filled with accomplishments, controversies, and many unexpected turns that could surprise even those who believed they understood him well. After serving as the President of the United States, his life did not quiet down. Instead, it grew even more intense with legal discussions, political conversations, and media coverage continuing around him almost daily. It seemed that his presence could brighten or divide a room instantly, depending on who you asked. To some of his supporters, he represented strength, confidence, and leadership. To some of his critics, he represented complexity, disagreement, or concern about the future. Yet no matter where someone stood, almost everyone agreed on one thing: Donald Trump remained influential. As time moved forward, one major story began to rise again and again: his legal appeal. It was not just a document or a lawyer's argument. It was a situation filled with meaning, consequences, and emotional weight. The appeal was tied to discussions about fairness, rules, and how decisions should be made. It was about how a leader's choices are studied after they leave office and how history judges them. The situation became something the country watched closely, not only because of the legal process, but because of what it represented about power, responsibility, and democracy. Trump's legal team worked with great focus. They reviewed records, statements, and events, searching for the strongest path forward. They spoke about their belief in their arguments, presenting them with confidence. Meanwhile, those who questioned the appeal tried to understand each detail, expressing their own viewpoints through interviews, articles, and televised panels. This created a national conversation, where experts debated and everyday citizens listened or discussed among themselves. In many small towns and big cities, you could find people talking about it. For some, the situation was simple. They believed Trump was being treated unfairly. They saw him as someone standing against powerful forces who did not want his ideas to continue influencing the country. They attended rallies, shared messages online, and spoke with emotion about supporting him. For others, the situation was not about politics alone. They believed that public leaders should always be examined carefully, no matter who they were. They viewed the legal process as necessary to maintain trust in government and public institutions. Through all of this, Trump appeared calm in public, even when the situation grew tense. He continued speaking at events, meeting supporters, and giving interviews. His voice remained steady, reflecting a sense of determination. This confidence encouraged those who stood with him. They saw it as evidence that he believed deeply in his position and would not step back easily. It also created a dramatic contrast with critics, who believed the situation required serious attention and careful review. The media played a huge role, as it often does. News stations discussed every update. Headlines appeared daily, some with strong phrases that could stir emotions. Commentators analyzed his expressions, tone, and wording. The story stretched across newspapers, television broadcasts, live streams, and social media threads. Everyone had access to it, and the constant visibility made the situation feel larger than life. This was not a simple disagreement. It was something that reached into history, politics, law, and the personal beliefs of millions of people. It made people ask questions about leadership, fairness, and how decisions should be made at the highest levels of government. The story was not only about Trump, it was also about the nation, its values, and its future direction. It was about how people understand power and how they respond when power is questioned. Behind the scenes, his close advisors worked quietly. They communicated with lawyers, reviewed notes, and prepared responses. They knew that every statement mattered. In situations like this, words carried heavy weight. A single phrase could calm tensions or raise them. A simple message could reassure supporters or spark new debates. Because of this, every move was thoughtful. Every press release, speech, and interview was shaped with care. Meanwhile, the public continued to wait. There was a sense of anticipation, almost like watching a long movie where the ending had not yet arrived. People wanted to know what would happen next, but no one could say for certain. The court process takes time. Research must be done. Arguments must be prepared. Decisions must be reviewed. Everything followed a structure, even when emotions outside the courtroom felt heated and immediate. Some nights, news channels would run long discussions, where multiple experts shared different interpretations. Some used legal language. Others tried to explain it in simple terms. Viewers watched, trying to understand which explanation felt closest to the truth. The discussion moved through homes, restaurants, workplaces, and public transportation. The story traveled everywhere, carried by conversation. One thing was especially clear. Trump's next steps mattered not just to him, but to many people. His appeal represented more than a legal effort. It represented a moment where the country watched how a former leader responded to challenge. Supporters saw this as a test of strength. Critics saw it as a chance to examine decisions made in the past. Everyone watched, and the gravity of that attention made the atmosphere feel thick and heavy. Even those who usually did not follow politics found themselves hearing updates. It was almost impossible to avoid. The story connected to everyday life because it involved questions of leadership and trust, ideas that affect every citizen. It also touched on emotions, loyalty, doubt, hope, and frustration. People reacted not just with logic, but with memory and feelings. In the middle of this, Trump continued forward. His public appearances showed him speaking with firm tone, using clear and confident gestures. He did not show signs of stepping back or slowing down. His speeches praised those who supported him and encouraged them to remain strong. He spoke of his efforts with optimism, even when the situation seemed uncertain. For his supporters, this confidence acted as a guiding light. For his critics, it was another point to debate. As days passed, the appeal remained one of the most discussed topics in the country. The story continued to evolve, with each detail bringing new reflection, new conversation, and new reactions. Even when the news seemed quiet, the tension stayed, like a calm moment before a change. This was the backdrop of the story: a former president, a legal process, a divided conversation, and a nation watching closely. The appeal was more than a legal step. It was a moment that held deep meaning for many, shaping how they viewed leadership, fairness, and history. The story was far from over. It was only the beginning of a developing chapter that would continue to draw attention in the days, weeks, and months ahead. As the appeal continued to unfold, the atmosphere around it began to grow heavier. It was as if the situation had entered a new phase, one that carried more pressure than before. Even people who had previously only watched from a distance started paying closer attention. The appeal had already brought discussion, but now it brought worry, curiosity, and countless questions. Trump's legal team met frequently in quiet rooms, surrounded by documents, computer screens, and folders filled with notes. They reviewed statements, timelines, and legal interpretations again and again. These conversations were serious, framed by a sense of responsibility. Each lawyer understood that the appeal was about much more than a single argument. It was about how the public would remember this period in history. Meanwhile, news networks began to examine the appeal more closely. Early news coverage had been broad and general, but now discussions focused on specific parts of the legal case. Reporters used charts, files, and quotes to explain different sides to the audience. On some channels, analysts attempted to break down complex ideas into simpler explanations. On others, debates took place between guests who held different views. The more the story was talked about, the more the public became emotionally invested. People did not feel like they were simply watching a legal situation. They felt like they were watching a moment that could shape the future. Supporters of Trump expressed strong belief that he was being challenged unfairly. They spoke about loyalty, trust, and the idea that he had always represented their concerns. They attended gatherings, shared their thoughts online, and encouraged each other to stay confident. At the same time, those who questioned the appeal also spoke with seriousness. They felt that reviewing decisions made by leaders was necessary to maintain fairness and stability in the country. They believed that a legal process should be allowed to continue without interruption. Their conversations were also emotional, shaped by their concerns for institutions and rules that guide society. The two sides did not always speak directly to each other. Instead, their discussions happened in different spaces, sometimes parallel and sometimes crossing. One could walk through a city, listen to conversations on street corners, restaurants, buses, or online spaces, and hear the story from many perspectives. The appeal had become something like a national mirror, reflecting not only the legal arguments but also the hopes and fears of millions. Inside Trump's circle, there was a desire to stay focused. His advisors encouraged calm, reminding each other that public pressure should not change strategy. They worked on speeches, prepared responses to questions, and made sure every public appearance matched the image they wanted to present. Steady, confident, determined. They believed that consistency was key. If Trump appeared strong, his supporters would remain strong. If he appeared uncertain, confidence could weaken. Trump himself continued to appear in public with the same sense of certainty. In interviews, he spoke clearly and directly, acknowledging that the situation was important but showing no sign of fear. His voice carried a tone that suggested resolve, something that reflected a belief in his path forward. His gestures were steady, his expression controlled. Even when asked challenging questions, he responded with composure. However, behind closed doors, even the most experienced individuals felt the strain of the rising challenge. It is part of human nature to feel stress when something meaningful is at stake. There were moments where silence filled the room during meetings, moments where each person sat quietly thinking about the next step. The situation was not simply about legal interpretation. It was about time, patience, and endurance. Outside the courtroom, public gatherings grew larger. Supporters held signs and chanted messages of encouragement. They wanted to show that they stood with him, not only in words but in presence. They believed that unity mattered. Their gatherings were filled with conversation, music, and speeches from local leaders who encouraged them to stay hopeful. Some people brought families wanting to show their children that they were part of something they believed in. Meanwhile, journalists attended these events, interviewing participants and capturing the emotion in their faces. Some of the people they spoke to explained that they felt connected to Trump's journey. They believed that his experiences represented something about their own lives. Others said that they simply admired his strength and wanted to show that loyalty matters. At the same time, communities on the other side of the issue also met to discuss the situation. They held town talks, college forums, and community discussions to review the legal case and express their viewpoints. Many of them spoke about the importance of accountability and ensuring that public figures are examined with transparency. They expressed their opinions clearly using calm and thoughtful language. Not everyone spoke in strong or emotional tones. Some people simply watched quietly, thinking about what the situation meant. They read articles, listened to discussions, and waited for official updates before forming opinions. They believed that the truth would emerge through time and patience. Social media became a place where the discussion continued non-stop. Posts, comments, and videos filled timelines. Some were emotional, some were analytical, and some tried to make sense of everything calmly. The internet made the situation feel close, as if everyone had a seat inside the courtroom even if they were miles away. Among all this, a new detail related to the appeal began to gain attention. It was not something dramatic or shocking, but something subtle, something related to timing, process, and interpretation. News anchors discussed it carefully, not claiming certainty but showing that the detail might influence how the appeal was viewed. This detail did not settle the situation. Instead, it added another layer of discussion. Some believed it strengthened the argument of the appeal. Others believed it raised new questions. The key issue was not the detail itself, but how people reacted to it. For many citizens, the situation became more confusing. They wanted clarity, and clarity did not come easily. The pressure around the appeal increased not because of dramatic events, but because of constant discussion, constant analysis, and constant attention. It created a sense of anticipation that could be felt everywhere, like the sound of distant waves slowly building toward a shore. Everyone waited to see how the situation would move next. Each new day brought commentary but no final conclusion. This rising tension did not mean the story was nearing its end. In many ways, it showed that the story was still early in its path. The appeal was still being examined carefully. The legal teams continued to work and the public continued to watch. Each moment carried meaning because everyone understood that whatever happened next would become part of history. Through all of this, one message was repeated from many voices in different forms. Patience. The legal process required it. The supporters needed it. The critics needed it. The entire nation needed it. Understanding does not come instantly, It grows through time, discussion, and reflection. The challenge was rising, but the story was not finished. The path ahead still held possibilities, questions, and decisions that had not yet been made. The next part of the story would not simply reveal events. It would reveal how individuals responded to them, and how the meaning of this moment would continue to shape the future. As the days passed, the atmosphere around the appeal slowly began to shift. What once felt like a steady process now felt like a moment approaching change. People could sense that something significant was beginning to unfold, even if they could not yet clearly describe it. There was no sudden event or dramatic announcement, but rather a gradual build in attention, focus, and curiosity. The story had reached a point where anything could influence how the next chapter would move. One afternoon, a new document became available to the public. It was not a surprise release or something unexpected. It was simply part of the legal process, a document that naturally became open once it was filed. However, the timing, the content, and the response that followed gave it importance. News. Reporters began to discuss it carefully, explaining that it provided more information related to the appeal. They did not claim that it proved anything final. Instead, they reminded viewers that legal matters are slow, detailed, and thoughtful. But even with calm explanation, people felt that this document could change the direction of the conversation. The document discussed some details regarding procedures and timelines. It included dates, statements, and clarifications that lawyers often study when forming arguments. For many individuals watching from the outside, these details seemed confusing or technical. But for those involved in the appeal, such details mattered greatly. In law, sometimes the smallest detail can have significant meaning. A single phrase, a timeline, or a previously overlooked note can shift how people interpret events. The public did not react immediately. At first, only legal experts and analysts spoke about the document. They appeared on talk shows and news programs, offering their personal interpretations. Some suggested that the document required a closer look. Others believed that it answered questions that had been raised earlier. But what mattered most was not the exact content of the document. It was how the conversation around it slowly grew. People online began to discuss the new information. They shared opinions, asked questions, and tried to understand what it could mean. Some felt hopeful, believing that the document supported the appeal. Others felt uncertain and wondered whether it introduced new challenges. The conversation did not lean strongly to one side. Instead, it spread in many directions, like branches of a tree growing outward. Trump's legal team studied the document carefully. They gathered in meeting rooms, reviewing each line with quiet focus. The atmosphere was serious, but not panicked. They were used to long discussions and careful examination. The team believed in preparation, and preparation meant understanding every detail completely. They understood that a legal journey is not shaped by emotion, but by patience and clarity. Trump was informed of the new developments. His response was steady and calm, similar to how he handled earlier challenges. He listened thoughtfully to the explanation from his advisors, taking in the information with awareness. He did not rush to speak. He took time to think, reflecting on how this moment fit into the larger story. After listening, he expressed confidence that the process would continue, and that the path forward still remained open. Meanwhile, supporters reacted with loyalty. Once they heard about the document, many gathered online to share messages of encouragement. They expressed that they believed in the process and that they trusted Trump to stay strong. They wrote supportive comments, created thoughtful discussions, and continued to speak positively. Their unity remained firm, and this unity gave them strength. However, critics also continued their discussions. They examined the new details with equal attention, sharing their thoughts that the legal process must remain careful and thorough. Their tone was calm, steady, and focused on the idea that every leader should be reviewed with fairness. They did not speak with anger or sharp language. Instead, they approached the situation with thoughtful reasoning. Across the country, there were many quiet moments where people simply paused to reflect. Perhaps they were watching the news at home, scrolling through messages on their phones, or speaking softly with a friend or family member. They wondered what direction things would take. They knew that the situation was important and that the result would hold meaning for many. But they also knew that the path to clarity was not quick. In schools and colleges, students studied the situation in their classes. Teachers used it as an example to show how legal systems, leadership, and public opinion interact. Some students felt inspired, seeing how people can stay strong under pressure. Others felt thoughtful, recognizing how complex real-world decisions can be. These discussions helped young people understand that history is not something that happens far away. It is something they witness as it takes shape. At the same time, the media increased their coverage. More interviews were scheduled, more experts were invited, more articles were written. Some headline writers chose language that felt dramatic, while others chose calm and factual wording. Either way, the result was the same. The story reached more ears, more eyes, and more hearts. This moment, where attention rises, where the public waits, where new information begins to influence the discussion, was a turning point. It did not decide the outcome, it did not bring final clarity, but it did change the atmosphere. What once felt like a slow unfolding now felt like a moment filled with meaning. You could feel this shift even in silence. In the quiet corners of homes, offices, newsrooms, and public spaces, there was something like anticipation. People were watching with more careful attention now. They understood that the story was not simply moving. It was building, shaping, gathering weight. Supporters continued to encourage each other to stay hopeful. Critics encouraged each other to stay thoughtful. And many who remained in the middle continued to watch with curiosity and patience. The story did not belong to only one group. It belonged to everyone who lived in the same country and shared the same time. This was not a moment of conclusion. It was a moment of transition. From this point forward, the story would not simply be about arguments and responses. It would be about how people interpreted those arguments, how they understood the meaning behind each detail, and how each person made sense of the moment in their own hearts and minds. The path ahead was still open. The direction had not been chosen yet, but everyone could feel that the next steps mattered deeply. The story was moving forward, and the next chapter was waiting.